honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you've simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens.
Senator JD Vance embarrasses Governor Tim Walz during the live VP debate for this current election. Bottom line up front, JD Vance mopped the floor with Tim Walz and really made him look like an amateur, to say the least. And in contrast, JD Vance proved why former President Trump picked him as his running mate. So what we're going to do is obviously react to the most viral clips at this point that I was able to put together and talk about it. Watch this.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again.
Now, I want you guys to look at the screen and see how Tim Walz is looking at JD Vance. That's how this entire debate went. Tim Walz looked at JD Vance as if Tim Walz wanted to vote for Trump and JD Vance. And you'll notice that as I play a couple of clips and just the way that JD Vance came out of the gate. And he introduced himself because he knows that whatever information people have about JD Vance, most of it is negative because it comes from where? The propaganda media. So he wanted to set the record straight. And that's exactly how you do it. And he did it within 60 seconds. It was a masterclass on that. Now, before we get to a very embarrassing moment for Tim Walz, let's address probably the top question that JD Vance gets because he is now supporting Trump and he is Trump's running mate. And that is, how could you support Trump if you've been so critical of him when he was president? And here is what JD Vance had to say.
Writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern.
Now, that final point is what I always go to about the Democrats. And the biggest mistake they've made over the past 4 years at a minimum is that they're so obsessed with trying to persecute Trump, trying to prosecute Trump, trying to, I guess, kill Trump, that they don't do their job. Their job is to run the government and pass pieces of legislation that's going to help America. They're so focused politically on Donald Trump. Now we get to the unfortunate part when it comes to Kamala Harris and her gut decision that she made to choose her running mate, Tim Stolen Valor Walz. This embarrassing moment he had where, again, in his history, he's lied and misled people about what he's done, when he did it, where he did it. And one of the questions that has come up recently that was actually exposed by CNN about his visit to China in the year of 1989, where there were protests that ended where the China government pretty much killed these individuals. And he tried to say that, he wasn't really there during that time, or he was there. And he just really misspoke and all this other stuff. And it was brought out to the light, which was very interesting. And so the moderators asked him about that. Listen to his response.
Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this, so I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in, and from that I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I didn't know what type of answer that was, and this is the type of person Tim Walz is. He's a person who tends to, in his own words, misspeak or misspoke, or in our words, misled would probably be the political term, or in layman's terms, lie about what you've been doing and when you did it and who you did it with. I mean, this guy is an ultra exaggerator about his record, and it's really shameful because he doesn't need to do it. Who cares when you went to China? Just tell people when you went. It's like no one cares whether you were a command sergeant major or a master sergeant. You served 24 years. End of story. Why do you think you need to put, I was a retired command sergeant major? That doesn't make a difference. Most people don't even know what that means. So I find it funny why he lies about stuff that has no meaning in the end when it's all said and done. No one cares. But that's who Tim Walz is, and that's the person she chose to be her running mate because it was her gut decision. Well, now we know if she becomes the commander-in-chief, we have an example of what her gut decision looks like, and it's not pretty. So let's hope she does not become the commander-in-chief, because if she's making gut decisions like this, it's not a good look. Now, I think one of the biggest controversial moments in this debate was when the moderators broke their own rules. They told us they weren't going to fact check. But what they didn't know was that if they go down that road, JD Vance is the wrong person to go down that road with, because you know what he ended up doing? Fact checking them, and then they retaliated by cutting his mic off. Watch this clip.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status, temporary protected status.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the
debate,
economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
The rules were that you guys weren't going to
we're
fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret.
Let me give you some context around this, okay? They're talking about illegal immigration, okay? Because that's what it is right now in this country. And it's literally the third question in the debate. So we have plenty of time to get to whatever topics you guys want to talk about. This is a 90-minute debate. And you don't want him to explain himself? I thought you guys weren't going to fact check. So that was the dagger for their credibility. Now, still, ABC takes the cake as far as the worst debate, the worst moderators of a debate. Now, CBS comes in at second. Now, a perfect example why JD Vance is so dangerous is because of how articulate, how calm, confident, and tactful he is in his responses, and how he could truly dissect what's happening in real time during such a monumental debate. And he calls out Tim Walz. And this is the moment where I really felt like, okay, JD Vance is pretty much embarrassing Tim Walz at this point. I mean, you know, he's been nice, he's been cordial, but at this point, it's not even fair.
Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas.
So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here, because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Oh, man, that's just, you have to acknowledge that Tim Walz did not come to this debate prepared whatsoever. And not even, I don't think it even would have mattered if he prepared, because he does not have the reps, right? And that's something that a lot of people reacting to this debate were saying was pretty much the problem with Tim Walz is he's playing at a high school level and JD Vance is in the pros. I mean, you may hate JD Vance, but you can't knock his skill, right? And how confident in his delivery. I mean, it's just not even a comparison at this point. And I wanted you guys to look at the screen because this is how it went. That's Tim Walz's face, and that's JD Vance's face. I mean, JD Vance is like, what? Who is this guy? Right? This is supposed to be the vice president nominee for the Democratic Party. Like, what is going on? So JD Vance focused strictly on policy. He did not do any personal attacks. And what he did was deliver a performance that I think when it comes to his own political career is going to put him at a different level. Now, before we wrap up this video, if you've been getting value from this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support us further, go to the link in the description below and grab yourself a t-shirt or buy us a cup of coffee. The closing statement, which is always probably the most important thing, you know, how you start and how you finish. JD Vance wasn't finished. Okay, he continued to rip through Kamala Harris and Tim Walz.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
I mean, he passes this test with flying colors. And I like the way that he speaks. I think this is the nail in the coffin. There's no more second guessing JD Vance. The narrative that the corporate media try to kick up around him and say that he's this angry and dangerous and vile person and he's racist and all this other stuff, that totally got snuffed out tonight. And you got to see what the campaign, I believe, was trying to hit home with more of the undecided or suburban women out there who were kind of on the fence. They don't really like the rough edges of Trump. But now if they watch this and they see the way JD Vance delivered this, they're going to see and say, well, wait a minute, JD Vance isn't Trump. He's not like him, and he's not what the media have been saying. And so here are some of my initial just takeaways or reactions from this entire debate. It was 90 minutes, of course. Let's just start out with probably the worst part of this entire debate. Again, the moderators, they get an F, okay? And here's why they get an F. They broke their own rules. As soon as you break your own rules, you lose all credibility. You'll notice through the clips that I played you, and maybe you've seen other clips where you don't see JD Vance personally attacking Tim Walz for the stolen valor, for the tampons in boys' bathrooms, and all the other stuff that we can bring up to attack him. He didn't do any of that. And the reason why I believe they didn't do that is they clearly have internal polling that tells them this is the type of message we need to bring home tonight. Will this debate even matter in the end? It will matter for JD Vance. No question. It will matter for the future of the Republican Party. It will matter because it once again proves that the corporate media has no idea what they're talking about. On the other side of things, will this lose her votes? In my opinion, I don't think so, okay? But obviously, let's wait to find out. Let's see what the polls are looking like. But all in all, A+ for JD Vance. If you have not seen the full thing, is it worth watching? No, because there's a lot of questions in there that are really boring. That's my opinion. What's yours? What do you guys think about these clips that I showed you? There's plenty more, of course. I will be creating more videos around this debate. But let me know what your initial reaction is in the comment section below. Thank you for checking out the video today. Stay grateful, stay focused, and stay true. Peace.